Wrestling with regret. Let's get it, yeah!
There's an old saying that applies as well to wrestling as just about anything else. KISS, or keep it simple, stupid. The more stuff you try to add onto a match or a gimmick, the more difficult it can be for fans to pay attention and invest in it. Now, the American Wrestling Association seemed to live by this creed for much of its run, but then by the end, whoop, simplicity, what's that? Times were tough for the AWA in the late 80s. The promotion, which had been around in some form since the 1930s, had plummeted in popularity as the WWF raided the territories and expanded their reach. One by one, the company's top talent was plucked from Verne Gagne's promotion and given new life in the World Wrestling Federation, or moved on to greener pastures in the NWA. Verne's stubborn refusal to change with the times and the recent implosion of his partnership with Memphis and World Class Championship Wrestling were two particularly large reasons why this once great company had been reduced to record low numbers and overall fan apathy. Even being broadcast on ESPN, which by this point was only about a decade old, couldn't help their fortunes, as their programming was constantly preemptive. Their time slot frequently moved around. The AWA was circling the drain faster than you could say Wrestle Rock Rumble, and something needed to be done to pull the nose up. With one last gasp for relevancy, the AWA pivoted as hard as they could from their old ways to try and present themselves as cool, hip, and with it. They needed to stand out as much as possible to try and survive against the WWF and Jim Crockett Promotions. They needed something fresh. They needed the Team Challenge Series.
Hello and welcome to the brand new AWA.
Yes, I know Wrestling Bios did a video on this themselves recently, but look, I've had this topic in my planner for almost a year now, and I wasn't going to move it back one more week. We're allowed to talk about the same things. Besides, I'm covering more of it, so, Considered one of the worst things the AWA did in their dying years, and arguably one of the worst long-term storylines of all time, the Team Challenge Series was a competition between three teams, each captained by some of their biggest stars. There was Baron's Blitzers, led by Baron Von Raschke, Sarge's Snipers, led by Sergeant Slaughter, and Larry's Legends, captained by none other than the world champ and Verne's son-in-law, Larry Zbyszko. You know, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Each week, the teams would try to win matches for points in the series. Many of these matches would have some sort of gimmick tacked onto it, from the benign to the goofy, to keep things interesting. And in the end, whenever that was, one team would win a $1 million cash prize. It sounds simple enough in theory. Other wrestling companies have used the point system for years now, like TNA's Bound for Glory series, the G1 Climax in New Japan, and AEW's Continental Classic, for instance. But the Team Challenge Series was an entirely different beast altogether.
The Team Challenge Series was an entirely different beast.
From start to finish, the TCS could best be described as a huge clusterfuck. From their glossy pilot that may have been a bit too ahead of its time, to limping across the finish line nearly 1 year later, this was mostly an exercise in slow, self-inflicted torture on the way to the AWA's eventual collapse. Do you want to watch a slow-moving car crash? Then join me as I look at the lows and the lowers of the AWA Team Challenge Series. By the way, in case you haven't done this yet, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Wrestling with Regret to get more crazy crap like this. According to legend, it was Verne's son, former tag team and television champ Greg Gagne, who came up with the idea for the TCS, wanting to add more of a sports element to their show. They worked with the AWA's syndicators to come up with new ways to hide the fact that, well, fans weren't coming to the arenas. Thus came this very well-produced yet unaired pilot episode of the new AWA and the Team Challenge Series, which has only been recently released on the former WWE network. Get a load of this: cheerleaders, rock and roll, tracksuits. Yes, sir, this was truly a brand new AWA. Took them 45 minutes to come up with that one. We see old Verne on a dock, hyping up this brand new concept. Not only are we getting a team-based competition with points, he also promises fans brand new super-duper technology that will change the way we watch wrestling.
You know, I'm so excited about it, I may come out of retirement one more time. No, I'm only kidding.
You better be. We then dissolve to the satellite base, where we find our hosts Ralph Strangis and Old Greg. Strangis was fairly green in 1989, but don't worry about him. He's gone on to become a multiple-time Emmy Award-winning broadcaster for the National Hockey League. Even for this guy, the AWA was a stepping stone.
For the first time, you fans are going to feel what I felt for 16 years. The arm drags, the body slams, the drop kicks.
The sweet benefits of nepotism? Strand just tells us to strap in, then it's time for our first match.
And here he is, 6'4", 240 from the beach in San Diego.
Oh, can I strap out of this now? Wrestling bios, you can have this one, buddy. I'm out of here. What? No, I have to stay? Come on, no. I can't believe the AWA beat WWE to the punch by 30 years with their own version of the Thunderdome. Only here it's not due to a viral pandemic, but rather a pandemic of weak-ass ticket sales. Here we see Tommy Jammer make his way down the Tron aisle, surrounded by a bevy of rowdy fans. Actually, it's the same exact shot of the crowd with one of them flipped over in a constant loop. I will give them this. It's certainly different and, dare I say, ambitious for '89. Apparently the original plans were to chroma key the crowd around the ring, not unlike the Zoom conference calls we'd get in 2020, but the technology wasn't quite there yet, so instead our boys wrestled in an empty studio. As you watch this video, be sure to remember that this is the company that let Hulk Hogan slip through its fingers only 6 years earlier. Jammer is ready for his match against Tom Burton, who Greg refers to on commentary as a killer. Oh yeah, real Buzz Sawyer, this guy. The match is fine. Not amazing, not bad, just passable. But whoa, look at all these close-ups and camera cuts, and take a look at these excited fan reactions. Now, obviously, these crowd shots they cut away to were taped separately, but the story behind them is actually faker than you might think. According to longtime AWA videographer Joe Chupik, he and his crew entered a restaurant in Minneapolis and just walked up to groups of people and asked them to cheer and boo for a make-believe match so they could film it. These folks weren't paid extras. Hell, they were hardly willing. They were just regular people trying to have a meal. Now these cameras and lights are on them and they have to pretend to care about wrestling? If they really did care, then wouldn't they have been at the arena and you wouldn't have had to do this? But it gets better, folks. Now it's time for some of that awesome immersive technology.
Greg Gunn, you punched the button. I want to see it again. Well, here, Ralph, you and the fans are going to see a body slam in slow motion.
Oh, it's just a slow motion replay. Ooh, so innovative. Not only that, a body slam is one of the worst moves to show in slow-mo because it becomes even more obvious that it's a work, which is probably why Greg never pushed his button again after this episode. Jammer wins this opening contest in less than 2 minutes with the Jammer Splash. Feel it through the screen.
Tommy Jammer, a man's man and a lady's dream.
It's worth noting that by this point, they haven't mentioned how the Team Challenge Series will be scored, who's going to be on what teams, or even if that last match was part of it. But up next, here's a promo between longtime friends Sergeant Slaughter and German Nazi-turned babyface Baron Von Raschke.
Sarge, we've been friends for a long time, but there's nothing like a friendly rivalry, right?
That was your best take?
That's all the people need to know. Oh yeah? Well, you're dismissed.
Aw, look at that little smirk. He's having fun with it. You love to see it. Mike Enos and Wayne Bloom, the Destruction Crew and future Beverly Brothers, are seen here convincingly destroying some buildings with their sledgehammers. Then they scream at the camera while intensely caressing said hammers. Seriously, I couldn't tell if they were mad or turned on. Maybe both.
When your old lady looks over at you, she's gonna be dreaming about us. Yeah!
Enos and Bloom enter the ring alongside their manager Johnny Valiant to take on Ricky Rice and a young Jerry Lynn. The match ends with a doomsday device on Lynn, which they show in slow motion to let everyone know he's totally fine. A young Eric Bischoff, still relatively new to the broadcast side of things, interviews the winners in the middle of the ring, which you can barely hear over the dubbed crowd noise. But at least Eric's hair is stunning. Now, according to official TCS lore, team members were drawn at random, meaning faces and heels would have to be on teams together, leading to possible dissension and infighting within the groups. Take, for instance, Colonel DeBeers having an issue with team captain Sergeant Slaughter as he stands in front of a faded South African flag, or as some have pointed out, part of a faded non-binary flag.
Not since I was an officer candidate in South Africa's officer candidate school has an enlisted man ever asked or told Colonel DeBeers what to do.
I mean, the Colonel may belong to an evil, racist, pro-apartheid regime in kayfabe, but on the other hand, He does outrank Slaughter, so tricky situation. And for those unaware, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that yes, Colonel DeBeers was indeed one of my original trainers in the world of wrestling, which makes doing this particular video very painful for me. But we'll get to the why of this a bit later. Now who's ready for some ladies? It's time for a boxing match between the Blonde Bomber and Slaughterhouse Shawn, surrounded by a group of ladies known as the Beverly Hills Knockouts. Boy, I haven't seen a sign this obvious that the old man in charge was losing influence since Karrion Kross got a main roster push. A lot went into production for this one. The camera cuts are fast and furious, the close-ups are intense, and the Applebee's crowd is loving it, I can only assume. It's got first-person shots of the ladies getting punched and the referee making his count. All we need now is the forklift cam, and you could have yourself quite the halftime spectacle. At one point, a wrestling match breaks out in the middle of the fight, and there's all other kinds of cheating, but the match continues. The Bomber throws a Sonny Corleone-like punch to knock Shawn down, but she's saved by the bell, which they established moments ago doesn't come into play until the final round. In the end, Shawn narrowly wins the match by knockout. This will be the last time we see these ladies on AWA programming. They'll be making way for real lady wrestlers like Candy Devine, Wendy Richter, and the magnificent Mimi for like 3 weeks out of the next year. The hosts break down the TCS some more and state they'll have a winner by the end of the year. Remember that now. Then they throw up the scoreboard and, if this is the pilot, where did all these points come from? How are they distributed? It's not explained one iota on this program. Hey Vern, get your ass off the dock and get some things in order here. Up next, DeBeers, the South African mercenary by way of Minnesota, takes on Paul Diamond in a King of the Hill match, which is basically a two-man battle royal. DeBeers does a good job as the slower, methodical heel, but the future Max Moon rallies to dump Easy Ed out of the ring to gain a point for the Blitzers. In our final match of the evening, Sergeant Slaughter, minus the H, goes one-on-one with the Terminator, who looks like a long-lost member of the Master Blasters in WCW. After a match full of power moves and slow-motion grunting, Sarge may have lost his H, but he did gain the W with a Cobra Clutch.
That match went a little longer than some of the previous matches. Were you in shape for this one?
Wow, even Bischoff was getting bored. And hey, are those mics even plugged in? What are we doing here? Strangis and Gagne wrap things up and promise more great action in the weeks to come, maybe even with an audience. This whole thing played like an infomercial for a product that nobody was buying. As the story goes, as Vern was sitting and watching the final version of this show, he repeatedly smacked himself in the forehead and said, "Oh geez," which does sound like the most Vern Gagne way to express frustration. Either way, the brand new AWA never made it out of the blocks, but the Team Challenge Series stuck around and was set to kick off on TV in early October of '89. But the competition already began in controversy, and it was Kokina Maximus, the future Yokozuna, who set things off when he jumped Greg Gagne outside the ring.
I have ordered that the AWA Team Challenge Series matches shall be held in a secured facility.
Because there were just too many shenanigans at ringside, AWA President Joe Blanchard decreed that the next set of matches would be moved to a secure location, aka a big, bright, pink, empty studio. I do appreciate them putting out a kayfabe explanation for the downgrade, but man, this is an insult to the word downgrade. Maybe it's because I'm still suffering from flashbacks of those pandemic-era shows at the Performance Center and at Daly's Place and the Chesapeake Employers Insurance Arena, but putting wrestling matches in a quiet, empty room is just a big challenge for everyone involved. In pro wrestling, the grapplers and the fans are part of the whole package. Wrestling is tried, but one just isn't the same without the other, and I would much rather have seen a partially filled arena than this pathetic Pepto Palace. Once things got underway, I got some sort of idea for how things would work. The matches originally had 5-minute time limits, but I'm not sure that's enforced in later weeks. I think a singles win earns a team 2 points, a tag win is worth 3, and a win by DQ earns 1 point, but never once do they remind us how it actually works. Commentary talks about points this and score that until they're blue in the face, but you have to listen real closely at the end of the matches to sometimes hear how many points are actually being gained. The Big Pink Studio era of filming gave wrestling one of its most ludicrous moments in history, as the Colonel was set to take part in something called the Great American Turkey Hunt.
What the hell is a turkey hunt? You're gonna expect me to participate in a match for a fat bird?
Otherwise known as a Raw Turkey on a Pole match, which... why? The Great American Turkey Hunt saw DeBeers take on Jake the Milkman Milliman from Larry's Legends. Jake was a lowly jobber that Captain Zbyszko wanted nothing to do with, so it seemed as though the short, stocky, bearded lamb was being led to slaughter. Oh, figuratively speaking, not a reference to Sergeant Slaughter. The Colonel managed to grab the fat bird, but the referee's brief incapacitation gave the milkman the opening to swipe the turkey for himself.
And Jake Millman, he took the turkey away from DeBeers. Wait a minute, Ledoux says that's it, time's up.
Really? You're gonna tell me the AWA was having a hard time attracting fans with stuff like this? Look, I've said before how much I enjoy my silly things in wrestling, and this is no exception. I do think it's hilarious, and DeBeers is amazing in how he sells the absurdity of it all. But this is just too much of a departure from what the AWA was about. They did need to break away from their stodgy ways of old if they wanted any chance at survival, but I'm not sure this is the direction they should have gone either. It's too Vince Russo for me. I'm sorry, Colonel. It was funny, though. After filming several matches at the KITN studio, the TCS went back to being in front of a live crowd. The AWA's big tours were long gone, and at this point they rarely left Minnesota, running most of their TV tapings out of the Mayo Civic Center in Rochester. That's where we find our next highlight, a football rules match pitting Mike Enos, now one half of the tag champs, versus the Trooper, aka the future Patriot Del Wilkes. Don't worry, this is nothing like the football rules match I talked about in my Bodyguards vs. Bandits video last year. The rules for this one are actually fairly simple, yet the match itself is a whole lot dumber. In this version, the wrestlers, who are wearing football gear on loan from the Vikings, each take turns trying to get a ball into a little kid's soccer net in the opposite corner of the ring within 45 seconds. It's as dumb and sloppy as it sounds, but hey, at least they got former Minnesota Viking Bob Lertsema to be the guest referee. They ended up using Lertsema a lot over the next few months as an official too, even if it didn't make much sense. I suppose at this point they were taking any quasi-celebrity they could find. The match begins with Enos getting the early advantage, only for the Trooper to overcome the odds and win the match to earn another point for the Blitzers. The main event for the week was a unique six-man battle royal, where two men from each team were in the match, but it was still every man for himself, one man left standing, and partners could technically eliminate each other. Yeah, that's a rule that makes sense in a team-based competition. That sort of thing was par for the course throughout the Team Challenge Series. If a match wasn't a straight-up singles or tag match, they did weird shit like a taped fist match where neither guy really used their taped fists, or one of several slight variations to the six-man battle royal, or a one-arm tied behind the back match, or a wrestling triathlon, or a meat grinder match where one guy had to wrestle two opponents at once for a certain time period depending on a coin flip. Hell, one time we saw a neck-pulling contest. I'm kind of surprised we never got anyone wrestling a bear. It was all stuff that was just different for the sake of being different. It was obvious the AWA was just throwing whatever they could at the wall to see what stuck. Anytime a clean-shaven Lee Marshall had to pop in and painstakingly explain the rules to the fans before the bell, you knew you were in for a fun night.
The first man who goes out of the ring loses. You could have teammate against teammate. You could have one tag team against one other man. Or should you or you be on the apron? The pinfall is a count of one, not a count of three. If your feet touch the floor, it's over, and the other team will win.
Maybe he could explain a little more how the point system works for any of us just tuning in, because I'll tell you what, I cannot make heads or tails of this graphic. I'm sorry, but the math just isn't mathing. Also at this point in the AWA, there was a stark division between the top guys, the few standouts on the mid-card, and literally everyone else, which is why so many of these TCS matches featured jobbers like Milliman, Tom Stone, Todd Becker, and Tony Leone. Like, who could be made to care about this? Our old friend the Milkman does get a lot of mileage out of that turkey hunt fiasco back in November. He comes out to interrupt the Colonel's matches, to call him a turkey, he gets whole video packages dedicated to it, and he somehow manages to keep winning his matches. They're really going out of their way to make Milliman a lovable babyface, a job guy who keeps defying the odds, including from his own team captain who wants to get rid of him. He's sort of like a weird merge between James Ellsworth and Otis. But see, that's the weird thing. Why does Zbyszko want Milliman to lose so much? Wouldn't that screw his own team over? Like, where's the logic? I'll say this right now, DeBeers is my MVP of the entire Team Challenge Series. My bias aside, the guy wrestles a full range of workers and gimmick matches week after week, more than any other singles competitor. He's made to look foolish, but keeps coming back as loud and brash as ever. He delivers some of the best promos on this show, like when he brings in the Night Stalker, a young Brian Clark, as his backup in the arm wrestling portion of the triathlon match.
Now I know he's an American, and I know that he probably abuses steroids, but that's what it's going to take to beat him.
I dig the honesty. The tag team scene in this company is pretty anemic. It's the Destruction Crew, the Texas Hangmen, Psycho and Killer, and that was pretty much it. Two heel duos on the same squad, one of them being the tag team champions. At this point, any babyface challengers were randomly paired up, and it was pretty sad. The Hangmen loved utilizing twin magic, and Wayne Bloom loved stopping Mike Enos from speaking.
I don't think it was great. Hold on, Mike, I'll handle this one. Them two smelly guys, I'll handle this one. There ain't no problem. Hold on, Mike, I'll handle this one.
But I have to admit, I do love this era of wrestling when companies can just use whatever songs they want with no consequence. Like, Paul Diamond comes out to The Final Countdown, the Destruction Crew comes out to We Will Rock You, Colonel DeBeers comes out to Welcome to the Jungle. The wrestling may be boring and the Team Challenge Series perplexing, but damn it if the tunes ain't rockin'.
Now you know why professional wrestling writers and sports writers all over the world are talking about the Team Challenge Series.
He lied lyingly. In February of 1990, world champ Larry Zbyszko lost the title to Mr. Saito in Japan. It was a moment so huge for the AWA, they waited like 2 months after it happened to finally show the footage. And you never saw Saito on TV. Oh, and then Larry would win the belt back at Super Clash that April. Well, that sure was something. Speaking of Zbyszko, man, they do their top guy dirty here. He loses more matches than he probably should as the world champion. His team spends the majority of the series dead last and bickering amongst each other. And look at all the ways they spell his name. There are a lot of these types of errors across the show. Like DeBeers' graphic has mercenary misspelled for ages before it's finally fixed. AWA, the company reinventing math and spelling. Because this went on for so long, you got to witness a lot of neat comings and goings for the AWA. Nikita Koloff showed up to challenge Zbyszko now and then. Tully Blanchard came through for a bit. Hell, even Harley Race came in to challenge for the world title. You saw future stars getting their break, like the aforementioned Coquina Maximus, Curtis Hughes, John Nord, who'd become the Berserker, and his partner, Flapjack Scott Norton.
It's called the Flapjack. Okay.
And hey kids, look who they brought back right after he finished serving time for sexually assaulting a minor.
You've been hearing a lot of stories. Where's the rock and roller? What's he been doing? It doesn't make no difference anymore because he's back.
Then, now, and forever, fuck Buck Zumhoff. Oh wait, they made him light heavyweight champ a couple of months later? Wonderful! But perhaps the most notable change to the roster came in mid-1990, when Sergeant Slaughter left the AWA to return to the World Wrestling Federation and take on his biggest role as an Iraqi sympathizer and WWF champion. Maybe he took offense to being booked against Coquina in a Battle of the Bulge match because they were both fat, I'm guessing. And so, after months of bickering with Slaughter on TV and even asking to be traded off the team, it's the Colonel who declares that Sarge has gone AWOL and that he has been chosen to take over the squad. He puts over the fact that he was voted in unanimously, even by the black guy.
It was unanimous. Even Hughes voted that Colonel DeBeers be the new captain.
The Colonel insists that the team now be called DeBeers' Diamond Cutters, and everyone seems to ignore that, as the announcers never get it right the first time, and all the graphics with team names on them go unchanged for the remaining month or so of this series. How dire were the straits of this company that they couldn't afford to update their chyrons more than like once a year? After months of telling fans that the series was winding down, very soon they finally reached the end at their final TV taping in August of 1990. Nearly a full year after the Team Challenge Series began and way past the original idea of stopping at the end of '89. By this point, Larry's legends had made a roaring comeback after Zbyszko gave his boys the big mo, as in motivation, not where my mind originally went. His team gained some much-needed points at the last minute in not one, but two behind-the-8-ball 8-man elimination tag matches. Yes, folks, they did that match twice in 2 weeks. I had to double-check and make sure it wasn't a rerun. So after all those weeks and months had passed, it was still anybody's ballgame to win the $1 million. On the same show where Harley Race challenged Zbyszko for the world title, and where DJ Peterson and the Trooper beat the Destruction Crew to snap their nearly year-long tag title reign, the finals of the Team Challenge Series took place in, you guessed it, a Battle Royal. This time it was basically a smaller Royal Rumble, starting out with 3 guys and another one coming in every 30 seconds, each elimination worth 1 point for your team, 5 extra points for the winner. Having to hear Lee Marshall keep updating the score was like listening to an auctioneer.
Our score now 49, 47, 45. So it's the Blitzers 49, the Legends 48, and the Snipers 45. So it's 49 to 48 to 47.
Slow down, Tony the Tiger! Colonel DeBeers was quickly tossed out at the beginning by Brad Rengans from Appleton, Minnesota, only to come back at the end under someone else's mask as the Unknown Soldier. It all came down to the Soldier and plucky Jake Milliman. The Milkman managed to unmask the evildoer, and you'll never guess what happens next.
Colonel DeBeers is the Unknown Soldier. Oh, over the top rope! He's out!
Nice, a full circle moment for the guy whose entrance music literally calls him a clown. And even then, after once again proving his worth, the Milkman is still rejected by his team as they celebrate with the $1 million check. Gosh, wasn't that worth 11 months of mindless, idiotic matches and a confusing scoring system to get the silly jobber over? Kinda? It should come as no surprise, dear viewer, that the innovative Team Challenge Series didn't help the AWA's fortunes, at least not in a positive way. By 1991, Vern could no longer afford to keep the company running and officially closed its doors. After a brief but unremarkable revival in the mid-90s, the AWA name and video library were later purchased by WWE. Of all the companies that ever posed a threat to Vince McMahon during his rise to power, it seems that the AWA has been ignored and buried more by WWE than any other, especially if it doesn't have to do with Hulk Hogan, Shawn Michaels, Kurt Hennig, or Scott Hall. But it's hard to just blame bad old Vince for the AWA's swift decline and collapse. Most of the damage was done by its own hand, since Vern was so hesitant to embrace change until it was too late and he had burned too many bridges. The Team Challenge Series was a decent idea on paper, but it went way too long, got way too repetitive, was difficult to follow, and it did nothing to build for the company's limited future. All the series did was further expose the problems that led to the AWA's downfall in the first place. When a jobber is the big winner in your year-long concept, it's probably time to pack it up. I will say that personally, the only stuff from this that gave me any joy was to watch the Colonel play his role to perfection throughout. Sure, he put over Milliman way too often, especially considering how it didn't lead to anything, but his shenanigans entertained me massively, and he was practically the only thing carrying me through an otherwise miserable viewing experience. After watching, I can't help but take a little pride in knowing that one of the men who helped me get my start in wrestling was a part of this piece of history. And considering how I make my living now, it's kind of ironic. Thanks for watching, everyone. What did you think of the Team Challenge Series? Could it have ever worked? Let me know in the comments. I'm Brian Zane, and I will see you next time.